Some stories were never meant to be written. Some lives were forgotten before they ever began. And some books wait to seal the fate of those who dare to read them. Lucas Hayes was a 29-year-old literature teacher. Since childhood, he had lost himself in the pages of books, searching for the meaning of life in words and lines. For him, literature wasn't just knowledge, it was a doorway into the human soul. But over time, the gray streets of Boston had drained the vibrant colors inside him. Tech-addicted students, impatient parents, a system that measured success only through test scores. Each day, he felt like he was losing a little more of his voice. Even the laughter echoing through the school corridors felt fake now. The children were screen-bound slaves who had forgotten how to dream. Every morning, as Lucas stepped into his classroom, he quietly thought to himself, "I can never truly reach them." Still, he hadn't given up. He believed that stories and books could still change something. When he read a poem or shared a powerful story, he looked for a spark in their eyes. But most of the time, all he received in return were blank stares. Months earlier, one afternoon, while preparing lesson plans in his office, a colleague had asked him, "Have you ever thought about teaching in a smaller place? Maybe it would feel more meaningful." Since that day, the thought had circled endlessly in Lucas's mind. Fewer screens, more life, more words. Eventually, in an official meeting with the principal, he expressed this desire. If possible, he wanted to be assigned to a smaller town. And now, on a rainy afternoon, the school principal called him into his office once again. A gray curtain had settled over Boston yet again. The streets buzzed with anxiety and rush. The principal's office was filled with old books and coffee stains. On the windowsill sat a half-withered geranium. The principal pulled a folder from his desk drawer and handed it to Lucas. "Do you remember, Lucas?" he said with a faint smile. "You once said you wanted to make a real difference in a smaller place." The file read, "Ashford Valley Public School, literature teacher position." Lucas had never even heard the name of the town. He looked down at the paper. There was nothing unusual, just a transfer offer. But at that moment, something quietly cracked inside him. He didn't belong to this city. To this life, this rush, this shallowness. He didn't belong. He picked up a pen. Without a second thought, he signed his name. To escape the crowds, the artificial smiles, the constant feeling of failure, and perhaps the hopelessness within himself. He looked out at the window one last time. Boston had blurred beneath the rain. What he left behind was more than just a city. It was a broken dream, a faded belief, and maybe, in Ashford Valley, he could finally begin to write his own story. The bus to Ashford Valley moved farther away from Boston's foggy streets, and with each passing mile, the tension inside Lucas began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. The city lights vanished, the roads narrowed, the trees grew thicker. Staring out at the window, he watched the raindrops dancing across the glass. A new beginning. Was it really possible? By the time the bus reached its final stop, the sun was setting. Ashford Valley was a small town, truly small. Single-story houses, sagging signs, rusted street lamps, and the air, while not as heavy as in the city, felt somehow denser, older. Lucas slung his backpack over his shoulder and stepped off the bus. His footsteps echoed along the dirt road. As the bus drove away, silence swallowed the town. No one was there to meet him. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He slipped it back into his pocket. He began walking toward the town square. A cafe with cracked windows stood on one corner. Beside it, a tiny greengrocer. Directly across, the town hall. An old man stood at the entrance, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a sun-faded cap. "Lucas Hayes?" he asked. Lucas nodded. The man pulled a rusted key from his pocket and dropped it into Lucas's palm. "Lodging," he said. "End of Church Street. Don't expect much." Lucas thanked him. The man turned and walked away with slow, heavy steps. The streetlights flickered on, casting soft, whisper-like glows. Lucas made his way down Church Street. Most of the houses lining the road were abandoned. Some windows were boarded up, others were veiled in spiderwebs spun through the night. At the very end of the street, he found the small, worn house that was to be his lodging. The door swayed gently. Wind or something else? He turned the key. The door opened with a low creak. Inside, it wasn't as bad as he'd expected. Still, the place was old. Cracked walls, an ancient wood-burning stove, a bookshelf, warped and swollen at the edges. He dropped his belongings by the door. He was alone, utterly alone. But this loneliness wasn't frightening. Not yet. That evening, he walked to the only open diner in town. A simple meal. Locals glanced at him briefly but said nothing. Lucas thought this silence matched his own. On the way back, passing under the dim street lamps, a sign caught his eye. Ashford Valley Public Library. An aged wooden building, its windows dust-covered, but it stood tall, like a guardian of forgotten time. Lucas made himself a promise. I'll come here, maybe here. He'd find what he was looking for. Lucas spent his first weeks in Ashford Valley trying to adjust to his new school. The students were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet compared to Boston. These children weren't just indifferent. They were trapped inside small, limited lives, expecting little from the world. Even finding the faintest spark of hope within them was a struggle. Every morning, as Lucas stepped into his classroom, a strange sense of responsibility would flood over him. He had to bring them the magic of literature somehow. He had to break this silence, with a story, with a spark. But Ashford Valley's old school building felt isolated from the modern world. There was no proper internet connection, no sufficient resources. That's why, one late afternoon after school, he made a decision. He would visit the library. The road to the library passed through the center of town. One by one, the streetlights flickered to life. On both sides of the road, abandoned buildings and rusted signs stood as silent witnesses to a forgotten era. As Lucas approached the library, he felt his heart quicken. Ashford Valley Public Library. The faded letters above the wooden door were barely readable. The windows were clouded with dust. The door stood slightly ajar, as if it had been waiting for him. He stepped inside. A heavy, ancient air greeted him. This wasn't just a library. It was a time capsule, a heartbeat frozen at the center of a forgotten world. At first glance, the floors were coated in dust. Some shelves sagged. Some books lay scattered across the ground. Some shelves were completely empty, as if their contents had been erased years ago. Lucas took a step forward. A faint footprint appeared in the dust beneath his shoe. He lifted his head and looked around. The library held a mesmerizing kind of silence. No buzzing flies, no drifting air currents, only the faint scent of old paper and aging wood. Empty frames hung on the walls where paintings once had been. Some books on the shelves were placed backward. The labels were faded, their letters barely clinging to existence. In one corner, he spotted an abandoned desk. A toppled lamp, a few books stacked haphazardly, no sign of who had left them there. Lucas smiled faintly. This place, it was flawed. But it was alive. Something lived here, something worn, forgotten, and perhaps still hopeful. I need to bring it back to life, he thought. For the students, for the town, for himself. Right then, he made a vow. Every day after school, he would spend a few hours here, organizing the shelves, cataloging the books, breathing life back into this forgotten place. Maybe, just maybe, he could leave a real mark here. That night, as he wandered among the dusty shelves of the library, Lucas, for the first time, didn't feel the heavy loneliness he had carried from Boston. This loneliness was welcoming. This silence was embracing. The library had drawn him in, and Lucas didn't yet know. This library didn't just guard books, it guarded lives. Over the following days, Lucas fell into a routine of stopping by the library right after school. The exhaustion he felt in his classroom seemed to dissolve among the dusty shelves. Each day he organized the shelves a little more, wiped away layers of dust, and sifted through the worn books. But some section felt different from the others, especially the farthest, most battered corner. It seemed utterly forgotten, untouched by time or hands. For several days, Lucas had avoided going there, maybe out of instinct, but finally, one gray afternoon, clouds slowly rolling over the town, he made up his mind. I need to fix that part too. He stepped quietly forward. The wooden floor let out a soft creak under his weight. As he approached the shelves, the air grew cooler. The shelves he entered were even more chaotic, even more cloaked in dust. Some books had no labels at all. Some didn't even have titles etched on their spines. As Lucas ran his fingers along one of the shelves, suddenly, tuck, a soft sound. A book, seemingly by itself, fell from an upper shelf. Lucas recoiled instinctively. His eyes darted to the ground. In the dimness, on the dusty floor, a lone book lay waiting. He crouched down and picked it up. It was heavy and cold. There was no cover. The spine was frayed. No title, no author's name. It felt ownerless. Lucas hesitated, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. Slowly, he opened the first page, and there, among faded ink stains, he read a sentence. That evening, the young teacher Lucas got lost among the back shelves of the library. He found a book, and he was never the same again. Lucas's fingers went numb. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. His name, plain and clear, was written there. A sentence about him. He tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't. It was as if his fingers had fused to the pages. With trembling hands, he turned to the next page. At first, he was merely intoxicated by the strange allure of the words, but with each line, he unknowingly sank deeper, because this book was waiting to complete unwritten fates. Lucas flinched and slammed the book shut. He glanced around. The library was as silent as ever. But somehow, the silence felt different now. It was listening, waiting. Lucas tucked the book tightly under his arm and hurried out of the library. That night, he left the book sitting on his kitchen table. But no matter which room he went to, he could feel its presence prickling at the back of his neck. He struggled to fall asleep, because deep down, he already knew the book was calling to him. And though he didn't realize it yet, his life had been split in two, before the book and after the book. Lucas woke up the next morning with sunken eyes, drained by a restless night. The book still sat on the kitchen table, staring back at him like a silent accomplice. He averted his gaze, grabbed his coffee, and headed to school. While teaching his classes, the indifference of the students, the echo of the principal's footsteps in the corridors, the coldness that seeped from the school's old walls, everything seemed the same. Almost. The first oddity surfaced during his visit to the administrative office. During his lunch break, Lucas went to sign some paperwork. Helen Price, the administrative assistant, looked up and said, "Oh, Lucas, I was going to bring these papers to you today, but your footsteps sounded so familiar." Lucas froze. The sentence, it stirred something in his memory, and then he remembered. In a page he had hastily flipped through the other night, the book had read, "While walking through the school corridors, Lucas would feel that others recognized his footsteps." It had seemed like a trivial detail. Maybe it still was. But a small, cold knot tightened inside him. That evening, he returned to the library, the book tucked firmly under his arm. He opened it again. This time, he read more carefully. New lines seemed to have emerged. One sentence grabbed his attention. On his way home that evening, he would see the street lamp under the old iron post shatter, ripping through the silence like sudden lightning. Lucas stiffened. He glanced at his watch, stepped outside. The sky was veiled in twilight. The flickering streetlights barely held back the coming darkness. As he neared the old iron post in front of the library, crack! A burst of light. He looked up. The lamp had exploded. Tiny shards of glass rained down onto the asphalt like a brittle snowfall. Lucas quickened his pace, nearly running all the way home. The growing panic gnawing inside him was beyond anything coffee could suppress. That night, he opened the book again. But this time, what he read cut deeper. The pages were not just recounting mundane events. They were revealing his most buried fears. It began with small signs, a sentence, a broken lamp, then with choices, then with life itself. Lucas slammed the book shut, running his hands through his hair. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a story. It was a destiny. And with every line he read, he tightened his own invisible chains. Yet one question burned in his mind. If it's already written, can I still change it? For the first time, Lucas realized he had a choice. He could lose himself among the lines of fate, or defy the very story that sought to trap him. But Lucas didn't yet know. Waiting for him deep within the forgotten shelves were other books and some stories only grow darker when you try to rewrite them. As days passed, Lucas's mind refused to quiet. Even while teaching in class, his gaze would often drift toward his students' faces. He couldn't help but wonder, did they each have a book too? Were their fates already written? These thoughts pulled Lucas back to the same place every evening after school, the forgotten corridor in the abandoned library. That night, under the dim flicker of old lamps, he wandered between the shelves, feeling a familiar tug. He let his fingers glide across the cracked leather spines, and then he noticed it. A name, faded but still visible. Emily Grant. The shy girl in his class, the one whose eyes always seemed heavy with unseen disappointments. Lucas felt a tremor in his hands. He pulled the book from the shelf, opened it carefully. The first line struck him like a cold slap. On a bleak winter evening, Emily Grant will make a careless step on her way home. The screech of brakes, the screams, and ultimately, the inevitable. Lucas's hands turned ice cold. He snapped the book shut, took a deep, shaky breath. No, it hadn't happened yet. Maybe it didn't have to. Maybe not everything written had to unfold exactly as foretold. But inside him, a dark fear was swelling, slowly. He reached for another book. Mr. Caldwell, the school principal. His fingers trembling, he opened the book. At midnight, Mr. Caldwell will awaken with a sinister pain in his chest. If help doesn't arrive in time, he will slip into eternal silence. Lucas shut the book fast. His knees almost buckled. He slumped against the side of the shelf, breathing deeply. It was then he realized this library wasn't just safeguarding his fate. It was the silent archive of the entire town's unwritten futures, and the things written there had not yet happened. Not yet. But when the time came, they would. A single sentence echoed relentlessly in Lucas's mind. In a place where fate is written, no one chooses their own story. And yet, a sliver of hope flickered within him. Maybe something could be changed. Or maybe trying to alter fate would only unleash something far worse. This thought sent a chilling shiver through Lucas. That night, just as he was about to leave the library, he paused by a dusty window. In the cracked mirror across the hall, he caught a reflection. It looked like him, same height and same frame, but the eyes were hollow. He spun around. No one there. He turned back to the mirror. The reflection still stared at him. It lasted only a second, but it struck him like a lightning bolt across his soul. Is this life really mine? Emily's accident had left an indelible mark on Lucas's soul. With every step he took, the image replayed in his mind. Emily's small backpack flying across the curb, the screams, the screeching brakes, and his own helplessness. he hadn't saved her, but the heavier question gnawed at him. What if I hadn't shouted? Maybe Emily wouldn't have panicked, wouldn't have stepped forward, and the car would have missed her. Then a darker thought surfaced. Or her death was already written. My voice, my presence was just the excuse, the nudge she needed to step into fate's embrace. Lucas shuddered. It felt as if an invisible hand had placed both him and Emily on the same stage, and he, unknowingly, had become a pawn of destiny. Perhaps even his will was not truly his own. No matter what he did, some stories were written only to end. As Lucas walked through the desolate streets of the town, the sky was heavy with gray, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating each corner with a trembling light. His mind teetered on the edge of a decision. Should he intervene or let everything unfold as it was meant to? At that moment, Mr. Caldwell flashed in his mind. He still had another name, another story, another chance. Just as the book had foretold, the principal would suffer a heart attack later that night, and if Lucas could reach him in time, maybe this time, things would be different. Determined, Lucas made his way to Mr. Caldwell's house. Lightning danced across the sky as he stood before the door. He knocked. No response. Without a second thought, he slammed his shoulder into the door. It creaked open. Inside, the house was dark, cold, silent. In the corner of the living room, Mr. Caldwell was curled on the floor. Lucas knelt down and checked his pulse. Weak, but still there. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling, and called the town's small health center. "Heart attack, hurry," was all he could manage. Minutes stretched endlessly. An eternity passed. And then, the sound of ambulance sirens split the night. The paramedics worked swiftly. CPR, an oxygen mask, a stretcher, and finally, Mr. Caldwell's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was cloudy, but when he saw Lucas's soaked jacket, he whispered in a frail voice, "Second chance." Lucas closed his eyes. For the first time, he had thrown a small stone into the current of fate. For the first time, he had managed to open a parenthesis in the lines of destiny. But this victory tasted bitter, because deep inside, a voice still whispered, "Some stories, not every hero can be saved. And some interventions only hasten the end." Lucas knew there was still an unfinished script ahead of him, and he had yet to confront his own ending. And maybe that story had already begun to write itself. Lucas hadn't visited the library for days. Every corner, every shelf held too many memories now. Emily's small footsteps, the principal's stern face, and the suffocating thought gnawing at his soul. I didn't save anyone's story. Maybe I just hastened their end. Yet that evening, as if guided by an invisible hand, Lucas found himself drawn back there. He walked through the silent streets of the town. The library door was slightly ajar. Was it the wind? Or something else? He stepped inside. Dust floated in the air like slow-moving ghosts. He instinctively moved toward a familiar direction, the forgotten, darkest corner of the library. And there, right at the center of the shelf where he had never noticed before, stood a single book. On its cover, only one title was written: Lucas, Final Draft. His heart skipped a beat. He reached out. The moment his fingertips touched the book, the air seemed to grow colder. Trembling, he turned the first page. Empty. The next page, empty. And then, in the middle of a page, faded ink slowly revealed a single sentence. "You are being written." Lucas flinched. The book in his hands was radiating a strange warmth. He lifted his gaze. At the end of the dark corridor, he saw a movement. A silhouette. Same build, same height, same shoulders. But it didn't move naturally. Lucas took a step forward. The silhouette took a step too, but not like a reflection. Its movement was delayed, almost like it marched to a different rhythm. A whisper echoed inside Lucas's mind. Some lives cannot be rewritten once they begin. He stepped closer. The silhouette stayed still, waiting. Another whisper. Some lives are passed on to others. And in that moment, Lucas understood. This was no mere reflection. This was a remnant, an echo of a life left unfinished. Perhaps Lucas, the day he found that first book in the library, had already stepped into a life that wasn't meant for him. Maybe the real Lucas was already gone, and this new life, this teacher, this town, this story, never truly belonged to him. A cold terror gripped him. He clutched the book tighter. The pages began to flip on their own, revealing new lines. Lucas took his final step, and the echo of an old life quietly took his place. Between the closing pages, the real Lucas was forever forgotten. The silhouette in the corridor took one step forward. Lucas's vision blurred. The book in his hand seemed to ignite, a silent blaze. The last thing he saw was his own vacant gaze staring back at him. The last thing he heard was the quiet thud of a book slamming shut. And then, another morning dawned over Ashford Valley. A teacher, a man named Lucas, walked the school corridors, but his eyes were different now. More hollow, more written. And somewhere deep within the dustiest shelf of the library, a new book appeared, untitled. For now.